Welcome, welcome. I got some good shots this week. This is one of my favorites. These are my boys, George and Ellery. They've got a science kit where they learned how to make their own bubbles. And it came with this like wand where you can use the wand as like a blower. So George has blown the bubble, and then Ellery has on the lab gloves, and he's going to catch the bubble and hold it in his hand. It's sold to them as like a science magic kit, and it is like magic. And I feel like this shot like captures that, like that feeling of like, whoa, this is cool magic we're doing here. This is something really amazing, right? They feel that way. I feel that way. I came around to this side because I wanted the sunlight to really blow up the bubble. I'd taken like 5 shots before this, but from the other side. And I was just realizing that the bubble wasn't going to show up that much, and that's really was key for this photo to work. So, and I only took one of these. And when I took it, I was just like, that's the shot I want. I'm going to show a couple of others. Let's see, maybe 4 or 5 others from this week. Yeah, this was one of my personal favorites. Right. I'm careful about where his head is and making sure that the lamp didn't interfere. Right. I didn't want the lamp coming out of his head. Right. I got this nice side lighting. Right. Nice combination of like the chair, but also the fireplace. And then just a good expression from him. This one's HP5 at almost 3200. This one I think is Tri-X. It's 1600. Here, I took a few good ones here. There might be one in the series I like better, but right now I like this one because it really showed the circle of pillows that they had made, and just sort of the pure joy of right laying in their pillow pile. And also sort of like this ridiculous Squishmallow thing. Oh, if I could only pick one from the week, this might be it. Right, I love this expression from George. He doesn't quite know that he's in the photo. He thinks I'm just getting Ellery's shadow. So it's a real genuine expression from him, just observing his dad. And then also I've got Ellery, right, this pretty unique thing he's doing off the couch. But right, what he's into is the shadow that he's made on the carpet, right? And I'm definitely, right, actually I'm noticing that this isn't my final edit, but it's close to it. Right, I'm using the Kudelka cross lighting, right, where he barely gets the off eye. Sometimes even the off eye is totally in the shadow, and you just see like the white of the eye. 2 more. All right, they were doing a pillow race, and they'd made an obstacle course. And again, I shot a few in the series here, and this one ended up being my favorite just because of their expressions. It's like, right there, it's a little bit aware that I'm taking a photo, but they're sort of just like caught up in the excitement of what they're doing. And then again, that the way the light's hitting them is nice. And then this one of them playing, right? They were making shadows on the wall and trying to be as ridiculous as they could be and making their shadows. And I sort of liked how I write this, like the way they're right. I got both their hands in the light, and you can see their fingers and their leg, but then I also got the shadows pretty well too. And then just a little bit of a dance around the edges. That I think complements the photo. Okay, so I posted these and right to an online gallery where I share photos with other photographers. And what a few people asked me, and it's becoming sort of a recurring joke of like, right? It's sort of a joke, but sort of not a joke. I think, right? It's like, hey, Dan or Daniel. It's like, how are you getting this look, right? Your pictures have a look, right? And it's sort of playfully called the Dan Mars look. And right, my kind of quick response was like, well, there's no substitute for looking at lots and lots of good photos by like the master photographers. Because I know that's been a big part of it, right? I in some ways, I think it's fair to call me like a copycat photographer, right? Or my work is derivative of other people's work, right? And I don't know. I mean, it doesn't tell the whole story, but it did get me thinking of like, trying to answer that question of like, how do I get my look, or what is it? Right. These days, right, it's like a lot of online photographers sell presets, right? Which I think is sort of ridiculous. The idea that, you would just have a preset and that it would just edit your photo for you. It makes a little more sense with color photography, where sort of the color palette can be very defining, but in black and white, right, it's it's hard for me to fathom one preset that works for every type of images. And it sort of got me thinking about like how I categorize my shots as I take them, and sort of like I could probably come up with like 3 or 9 different types of shots I take. Then maybe there'd be a preset for like each one of those 9. But ultimately, it's like, I don't want to support the notion of presets. Right? It's like teach a person how to fish instead of catching the fish, right? It's like you would never try to get someone to become a master darkroom printer by saying, oh, well, there are these 3 or 6 strategies that sort of work for every image, right? It's like, no, we gotta learn a lot more than that. So I wanted to, I don't know, this is definitely not going to be the video that answers all of it, but it's more of just sort of the embarking upon. Right. I will say that like when I'm shooting, I do often sort of go into a mode of maybe thinking about another photographer's work, right? I'll sort of go into Kudelka mode or Robert Frank mode or right, HCB mode or Lilo mode, right? I'll have a photographer in mind in sort of a style, right? I sort of wear that hat a little bit when I'm photographing. Right, and some of that's like dictated by a focal length, right? I'll pick a lens, and that'll kind of remind me of like, oh, well, this person's also a 50 millimeter shooter, or this person's a 24 millimeter shooter, and think about sort of their strategies. But then also just in terms of like, right, composition and contrast, etc., right? And then I'll, sort of in addition to having maybe someone's work in mind or style, also start to kind of break my images up into, right, is it a backlit photo, a side lighting, or a front lighting? Right, I'll sort of, that's a question I'm often asking, right, is kind of what am I wanting here? What am I doing? And I sort of jump between those three things. And then I think a lot about, I sort of squint my eyes when I do this, but right, I'm trying to find where are the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. Because, right, that's where the eye is going to be strongly drawn to the highlights. So I really want to make sure that I don't have any highlights that are not something I would want drawing attention. Right, that's one of the top killers of a photograph, is for there to be some highlights in the photo that are really not where you're wanting the person to be looking. Right, and then I'm sort of thinking about midtones of, right, it's usually for me it's like people's faces, right, and then the shadows is like really sets the frame, and I usually like to have a lot of dark shadows. So like here's a good example, right? When I took this shot, I was already imagining this deep right this on the right side, all of this shadow. And actually, in this video, I'm going to rescan this one and just sort of show, right, how much it was. I mean, it's sort of there, but not really, right? And, Ansel Adams, of course, was like always talking about how you have to visualize or pre-visualize, and, right, you gotta develop your sense of seeing what the final print's going to be as you're taking the photo. Partly one reason I got away from EVFs, even though it's sort of nice, like an EVF can be black and white and it can be high contrast, is like it's a little bit too much suggestion, and I really want to just sort of use my own mind to do the visualization. All right, so I've been thinking a bit about, or when we think about trying to understand what photographers do, it often gets compared to like maybe what a piano player does. Right? I've read some photography books where people try to explain, what photographers do in terms of what a piano player does. And I've even thought about that too, but I wanted to do something different and, right, compare it a little more to what chess players do. So like I'm going to show you this really quickly. Just boom, right, this, and away. So I don't know if you solved it, right, but a good chess player, right, club level or better, only needs 2 seconds to solve that. Right, and how do they develop that, right? It's a lot of pattern recognition, a lot of experience, a lot of playing games, watching games, studying mating strategies and patterns, and keeping themselves in tune. And it's the same thing with photography, right? And I think that's part of why we look at lots of other photographers in photo books. Right, part of it, other than just finding it really interesting, is that like that's our practice of, right, when I look at a Bresson image, right, I am going through a full exercise of like kind of what he was thinking and seeing, and right, what decisions he was making, and kind of everything that's at play, right, in order to put it into practice myself. Right, so it is a combination of patterns, right? Visualization strategies, and experience. And I don't want to pull it up because it involves someone else's photo. But like this week, somebody put in a photo and was asking for some critique, and it was a color photo and sort of thinking about the composition of it. And right in under a second, I saw a totally different option in the same frame, right? Of, well, let's make it black and white and let's emphasize a different basically change the subject. Right. And I think, what struck me about it is like, I found it in like literally a second. Right. And so it just kind of goes to show how much I'm a bit like the chess club player that was only needed 2 seconds to solve that. Right. It's like, and again, like that's in my own sort of direction, right? Somebody may have seen it and be like, oh, I didn't want to do black and white, and that wasn't the subject. And sure, that's an option, but that's not really what I want. So in a way, it's also like I'm ingrained in my own patterns, and right, which is also it's a big deal if I start shooting color, because it is so different than black and white. It almost feels like, right, a different set of strategies. It is, right? It's a different set of strategies. And like people I have to think about, and right, it's I'm gonna probably cough. I've had a bad cold, so I'm gonna mute and cough and come back. Sorry if this was more talking than you wanted. I am sort of wanting my videos to also be interesting to people who just listen, right? Maybe a night shift worker who's just like almost treating me like a podcast. All right, to move on. So, I don't want to go through the list of all the photographers that sort of inform me. But, right, I have to always call out Kudelka because he's a major influence on me. Right, so here, this is front lighting, right? Again, he's thinking a lot about sort of how he's framing the faces, where kind of that deep shadows are going to come from. Focusing a lot on getting sort of that beautiful mid-tone gradation across the faces. This is, classic side lighting from him, which I borrow a lot. And then this one's like, right, sort of like, make sure that you include these sort of interesting sideline shapes and shadows as part of the image. Again, classic Kudelka side lighting. And then this is a different one. Go away. Go. Right. I don't even know if it's Lilo Raymond or Lilo Raymond, but her photos move me, especially the prints. I find that there's not a lot of good copies online to look at. They really don't capture the right tones. This one a little better than most, but right. And her work's a good example of someone who's very different than Kudelka, right? So I think if you start listing off like Robert Frank and HCB, and there's a lot of photographers that their work's sort of similar, right? But I sort of like to have a few people in mind that their styles are actually very different, because when I jump from one hat to the other, right, I get a bigger jump in sort of right, the differences. And so like this is a little more like high key work, delicate tones, right? And often kind of the darker shadowy part is, right, it's a much smaller part of the photo, and it's usually the subject itself, right? Instead of using the shadows to really complement the subject, it's like, right, the dark part is the subject. So you kind of see how it's almost like the inverse of what I typically shoot with like the Kudelka hat. All right, then I just want to like, right, what makes an image? There's of course the photographer and the film stock and all that stuff, but what's not given enough attention is the work of the editor, the art curator, and the darkroom printer. Just to start a list. And I wish Magnum did more things like this, right? But the Magnum enterprise, like in addition to just being this incredible collaborative group of photographers supporting each other, right? They had access to amazing darkroom printers. And so I wish Magnum would really advertise that more and to put more of the credit to the printers. But these, right, this just gives you an idea of how much work is going into the darkroom process, dodging and burning. This is, let's see, this is Pablo Inierio. So I don't know all their printers. I wish I was, more well versed in their work. But you can just see here, right? Sort of like here's the original versus sort of after, right? And probably the editor and the photographer and the darkroom printer have collaborated into what the print's going to look like. Right, and sort of with all of these, something that stands out to me is, let's call it maybe manipulation or dodge and burning, is how much they're controlling tones, right, in the darkroom. And so, right, it's a little bit of an invitation to, when we visualize a photograph, is to give ourselves a lot of power over what the tonal values are. And then when we're editing, right, is to, right, be that darkroom printer that, right, puts in a little extra work, right? We're not just doing a couple of global adjustments and we're done. So what I wanted to show then, sort of in this video, is I was going to scan a few images and sort of just show my editing process. I don't like being at the computer. I don't. I sort of find it's the least enjoyable part of photography for me. I'd rather develop than. I mean, I will say I do enjoy sort of putting the finishing touches on an image and enjoying it. But I've tried really hard to speed up how much time it takes for me to get to that point. Right. All right, let's just do it. So I'm gonna, quick detour, total detour. So I'm starting to think about shooting some 50 millimeter again. I've been on a 24 millimeter, 25 millimeter kick. But right, two of my favorite 50s are the Leica 50 Rigid Summicron, and then also the newest Zeiss ZM Sonar 50 1.5. And so I just wanted to do kind of towards the end of the roll, right? Sort of after I've shot, I've got some good shots, but I maybe have 5 frames left, right? That's kind of my opportunity to go out and do some lens testing, just to kind of finish a roll. So here is the Rigid. Now, what I'm going to do here, so I've got, right, one camera, same film, and I've got the 2 lenses. And as fast as I can, I'm going to swap the lenses and try to take 2 identical shots. And I'm also paying a lot of attention to the light and the sun, because things can change so fast. And I don't want to, misattribute to the lens something that was really just a cloud in the sky. But these were pretty good. So this one's pretty good test shots. So here's the rigid at f2, and then I also shot the sonar at f2. So I'm going to switch over to the sonar. Are you ready? All right. One is I composed a little bit too low, but it should blow you away, the difference in contrast, and it's contrast coming through flare control, right? What's the biggest difference is the coating on the new ZM, right? Right, my 50s Summicron has a lot more flare, and it's the kind of flare that basically steals light from these highlights and opens up shadows like crazy. Right, look underneath the mailbox, for example. Right, the editing is the same, the scanning is the same. The only thing that that's different, really, I mean, is the lens. Then here is a shot with the rigid. Right, this is a light source in the scene. You can see the light leaking and sort of bleeding into the shadows. And then here it is with the sonar. And so even though like the sonar definitely gives like that classic sonar rendering, but the modern coding is just, right, totally brings it up to modern standards of what we think coatings are doing for flare. Now, I'm not saying that makes it better, right? I think a lot of times for black and white photography, right, having a lens that opens up. So here's the rigid and the sonar. And you say, whoa, what happened to this whole dark corner? Well, I mean, it's there, right? But I have to really try to open it up. Where the rigid just has so much, right? And it's flare, but it's a really fun type of flare for black and white photography, because it basically just kind of adds lift to your shadow, but it doesn't rob sharpness. But it does sort of, the downside is it sort of creates this kind of like, right, you might actually want that edge to be well defined and not sort of lost to flare. So that's where it's like, well, that's why I carry two lenses, right? Be like, yeah, I'm carrying two lenses today. I got a 50 and a 50, right? Because they can be so different, especially when you start talking about old vintage lenses and new lenses. All right, I totally went off on a tangent, but all right, so I'm going to create a new session. Just going to call it whatever. Right, scanning, whatever, scanning. So I'm going to scan 6 frames and then maybe edit 1 or 2. All right. So plugging in my scanner, which is actually a digital camera, plugged into an EZ35 from Veloy. Thank you, Veloy. All right, so these first couple shots, so what you can't see is what I'm doing on my camera, which is right. I'm at 6.3, f6.3, and then I'm just using the LCD on the back just to right, just kind of get an exposure that's gonna, look decently right. And I'll talk more about what that means here in a second. Right, so I've scanned a negative. Oh, haha, let me clean this negative. It's been sitting here for about a week. Got it. You see the hair? Got a hair on there. All right, let's try again. All right, let's see if I got the hair off. Yeah, got the hair off. Okay, so first thing I want to do is enable black and white mode. And then everything else is basically turned off and like set to nothing, including sharpness. I do like to back this out just a little bit, and then also like to back the contrast out some. Now, you know, the reason there is sort of like, I mean, I back the contrast out just because I like to sort of see a little bit of a lower contrast image and then be a little more thoughtful about how I bring contrast into the image. And then sort of this like -1 on the exposure goes back to like exposed to the right. So I'll let you look that up separately. Which these days is, I don't know that it really makes a difference. But it does sort of make a difference that you want to scan more towards the higher values in your scanner camera. So, oh, you know what I should do? It'd be kind of fun. Is maybe I do sort of like a how not to edit in addition to like how to edit. So, which one do I do first? All right, I'm gonna scan this poorly, and then I'll edit poorly, and then I'm gonna come back and do it well. If you listen carefully, you might be able to hear the rain. All right, so poorly would be to not expose to the right and to expose way to the left. So I'm going to reset that, and now I'm going to expose too far to the left. So you can just see the kind of look at my histogram here, right? Everything ended up to the left, right? Now I'm going to, right, I need to invert this because I don't want a negative. Let's start with just the basics of that. Okay, now I'm gonna say, hey, I need to bump it up a little bit. Okay, I'm using my software to bump it up. Something like that. Okay, now I might set my black point, set my white point. Okay, and then I'm gonna say, oh, you know, I want more contrast, so I'm gonna add some contrast. And now I'm gonna crop. Again, this is an example of how, basically like how not to do this. And then I'm gonna say, but I want to lift my shadows so that I can see my sun. And I'm gonna come in here and just lift my shadows. And now I'm gonna say, oh, you know what? I want it to look more like, I want more clarity. And then I also want to, I've burned out my highlights, so let's bring those back in. And now let's see. Oh, you know what? I want a sharp image, so I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna add some sharpness, something like that. And let's see. You know what? I actually want a little more contrast. Get those blacks down. Bring my black point, something like that. Okay, cool. I'm done. All right, so that was like how not to edit. All right, so now we're gonna start back over, and we're gonna do this a little better. So now I'm gonna expose. Now I'm doing a lot of variables, right? But I'm gonna go back to sort of. Right now I'm gonna expose to the right. I got to reset a bunch of the Capture One as a way of like sort of assuming that you wanted whatever you did on the last image, it carries it over. So I'm just going to reset all that. Get it out of here. Okay, so I'm already in black and white mode. And right? So we expose to the right. So now let's bring it back over. I like to take the contrast out. So now just to say again, this is like, now I'm into this is how I edit and how I recommend editing. Let's just check my crop real quick. Okay. Now we gotta invert it. And usually the first thing I do is sort of make little minor adjustments to black point and white point, right? Basically clipped it right. Something like that. And now I'm just, kind of identifying what it is I'm going to want to do. This is an underexposed shot, right? I sort of, when I saw this one as a negative, I was sad because I really should have given it another stop of exposure, right? My sun here is a little bit lost in the shadows. So I actually I could have chosen many other images that were much simpler to edit. This was probably the hardest image I edited all week, but also a favorite. So, so knowing that my sun here is sort of like critical to making the photo work, and also sort of underexposed, right? I got to keep all that in mind here. I'm going to try moving the mid-tone first. Just kind of, right, opening it up a little bit, right? Here's the extreme of that. Swinging that mid-tone around. But I'm just going to do that to open my son up a little, George, my younger son, up a little bit. Something like that. And because I really know he's critical to the photo, I'm just going to come over here. And at this point, it's sort of like, let's figure him out first. Right? Sometimes right, if the subject is basically nailed, I'll focus on kind of the rest of the image first and then fine tune the subject. But this is sort of the opposite of that, where I really want to focus on him and then I'll kind of deal with the rest of the image later. Right, I do want some more contrast, right? I definitely want these midtones to separate more. And also I'm ready to accept that these shadows need to be lost. Sort of the look I like anyways. But I don't want to just do that with this guy. Instead, I'm actually going to back this kind of contrast out quite a bit. And I'm going to use the curve. Notice that my black point's not quite lined up yet. And I think that I'm okay with that because I'll come back and sort of towards the end and work that final black point. But here I am wanting to sort of find kind of where is that right bend. Something, getting closer. Right, sort of this, right, this S shape. But there's a difference between like an S over here and like an S over here. Right, so I'm trying to kind of figure out where that S is. Where's the bend? It sort of helps separate those midtones on him. Right. So I'm getting close. And sometimes at this point, right, close is good enough, and then let's move over to other parts of the image. All right, now, look at this hair. Let's go ahead and bring that black point in a little more, especially look at this whole right side, right? And again, this is back to what I was visualizing. is I was visualizing a lot more just black over here. Now I can do that with a global edit, or I can do that with a dodge. And for this one, because basically I'm pretty fine with the tones across the image otherwise, I'm going to go with a dodge here. And I want to make this sort of big. You can slow this flow down, but I do want to darken this. Now notice that I didn't just choose exposure darken, that I'm really just saying I'm going to grab kind of all anything that's sort of like a middle tone, and I'm going to make it much darker. And then I come in and I just sort of, right, it's like being in the dark room. Just going to paint that in. Then I might make it a little smaller here, but less hard. I kind of come work this area. Now, if this was a really important image, I would take my time, big time, and I'd be careful, but because this is a YouTube video that I would like to keep under 10 hours. Now, I will say that, like, on average for a roll, I don't like to spend more than an hour on a whole roll. So it's sort of like scan them, find which ones I feel like are worth my time. A lot of them I'm making quick edits. And again, this is like probably the hardest one on the whole roll. Why did I start with this one? Now I want to, there's some annoying things, right? Right, with film you often get like little pieces of dust or maybe an imperfection in the emulsion. Right, so I just kind of come through with the, what do you call this? The Band-Aid tool, draw healing mask. Just kind of clean it up. Anything that's like annoying me. Although it often turns out that like what's annoying me is like dirt on my own monitor. Right? And I'll zoom in and there'll be nothing there. All right, so how are we doing now? I really like the right side of the image. All right, now I want to pay attention to sort of the next most important thing is sort of this area down here, the shadow of his head. And notice I'm starting to get some highlights that are maybe blown. But also that shadow is like kind of critical, right? It's critical to the shot, right? I think. So I'm going to make a new layer here, and I'm going to, again, sort of use that, just kind of drop the tones. I want to be more of a shadow. And also, I don't mind if these real high values come down just a little bit. Make it a little smaller here. That's pretty good. And then, you know, a lot of people, especially digital photographers, like to make sure they tuck their highlights in just so they don't totally blow. This look fine to me. I don't mind blown. Especially here, just to contrast it with like the shadow, right? All right, so that looks pretty good. Okay, next, I want to think about, again, anything that's like really a problem. I don't like this tag, so I try not to do this, you know, because I like an unedited photo, or I like my manipulations to basically just be tones and maybe very light cropping. But this tag is drawing too much attention, and it's pretty easy to get rid of. So just come in here a little bit with my healing brush. Yeah, that looks pretty fine. I could, right, if I wanted to just, there's sort of a line here that gives sort of a sense of an, right, kind of broke up this line just a little bit. Here, I'll turn off the healing layer. right? You kind of toggle on and off. So I did an okay job. This is maybe a good chance to jump over to the stamp tool, right? And just sort of kind of make that line looks a little more like it's continued. Whoop. I don't know. Something like that. I'm going to do one more touch up there. All right. As you know, again, once we go out to 100%, that was okay. That was okay. I did better. I could do better, but I'm not gonna try again. Then I feel like I might want to touch the tones on the couch here. So I'm gonna see what happens if, for sort of pulling in some of these highlights just a little bit, I'm gonna use my dynamic range. I sort of come into this thing last, but I'm gonna just see what bring in. Oh, whoops. Yeah, that's not what I want to touch. It's pulling when I'm see when I adjusted it was only adjusting these highlights, and that's not really what I was wanting to adjust. I was hoping it'd sort of play around with this, but it didn't quite. I'm going to adjust sort of the brightness of the whole image a little bit. See where that gets me. I do sort of like a little bit more open, just a touch. And then over here on the left, right, I'm not quite sure I like exactly where that edge fell. So I might just, talking about minor touch here, just a little bit. And I feel like I'm getting close. I am curious what happens if I sort of open up my other son a little bit, sort of more of like the pattern on his pants and his leg. So I will see about that. Yeah, and this is where I don't know, like, you know, people like watching Magnus Carlsen play chess. And not to say I'm like Magnus Carlsen, but like I do kind of wonder if there's more room on the internet, on YouTube, for just people editing. Because like for people who don't edit at all, like you could learn a lot just by kind of watching people who are good at this. Right, so I'm kind of using the combination of the paintbrush, but also the eraser to sort of kind of get the right shape. Then I'll just toggle that on and off. Right, I do sort of like it a little more. I like him a little more open, like opening the tones up a little bit, kind of showing off that shape. And then because there is some sort of interesting kind of pattern in there, I'd be curious if I increase the clarity a little bit. I'll decrease it, increase it, sort of see which one, maybe something like that. I feel like I'm getting close to done. I am maybe feeling like this left side's a little hot, so I might come in for the vignette and circle the crop and just see if, yeah, I do sort of like tucking that left side in just a little bit. I mean, the light's coming from that side, so I don't want to make it too unnatural, but I think something like that's nice. And then, right, I think, you know, his hand here, I want to make sure that this element is really strong. I think it is. His face and his hair, I think, is also important, but pretty spot on. And then right? I think coming back to my other son is sort of to finish this. It's like, how did I do on these, on him? So I'll make a little new layer here. I am maybe interested in what happens if I try to lighten his face a little more. And then also his hands, right? I kind of felt like kind of the hands here were important. Right, maybe give him all right. Looks pretty good. In terms of sharpness, again, because this was like, he is about as deep in the toe as I want, which means the grain is pretty large. That, right, if I jack up the sharpness, right, look at sort of, that does not look good. Especially when you're sharing black and white film to smart devices, they tend to not know what to do with film grain, and they way over sharpen. And so I like to stay away from all that, and I don't apply any sharpening. If I was gonna make a print, then I might start to think about what sharpness I want, but just kind of as a baseline for sharing online, I do no sharpening. And again, this is funny how this far left border is sort of bugging me. This is how sort of like, I don't know if anal is the right word, but right, this little look at that is bothering me. So I'm gonna get rid of it. I don't want to crop anymore, because I sort of like all this up here, but that one little highlight value was bugging me. All right, so I don't think I want to do 5 more images. I think I'll just stop on this one. I am sort of interested to maybe compare this to the first one I did. And again, this is by far the image I spent the most time on. But let's see, let's go back to, I think it's on this roll. Let's compare them. Nope, not that roll. Yeah, here. So this is what I was considering done. And then let's come back to this one. Ooh, you want to know something? That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I chose a different frame. I shot 2 or 3 of these, and I just, because I was thinking I was going to scan all 6. I scanned the first one and just went in to edit. This is actually a totally different photo. Oh, Daniel, that's why I was like struggling. I was like trying to edit it in his hands. I was like, this looks a little different than last time, and it is. It's a different photo. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But it's got me thinking. I sort of do like I like my son George better in the one I chose here, but it is interesting that I sort of liked. Otherwise, I actually think I liked the other image better. I do want to keep this video under an hour, so I was thinking I'd edit more, but I'm not. But I will compare sort of like this one that I said was like how I edit a better example versus the other one, which was like the example of not how to edit. And let's see if I can make that a little bigger. Is it going to let me toggle between those two? Well, I'll just do it this way. So, that was the like, hey, don't edit this way, right? And this is more of like better. So, right, how did I get the Danmar's look? Right, I'm totally thinking about Kudelka as I shoot this. Right, I see the cross lighting. I'm imagining, right, like this side of his face is going to be very dark, and you're basically just going to be able to see his eye. And I'm also imagining all of this dark black on the far right. Right, a little bit of that bring the shadow element into it. This interesting shape of my son Ellery. Right, so this was a pretty strong match to sort of the visualization I was doing when I was taking the shot. And then it's right getting into the dark room and digital dark room and doing my work, which was kind of a lot for just the image. But then I go back to like, right, I'm saying that, right, look at this, right? So, but on average, I would say I only spend about 1 minute per image. And I do way less dodge and burning, and usually because my exposures were better. This was a little underexposed. But then, right, here I am spending all this time editing, maybe the frame I didn't want to. So, right, the first process is always scan the roll, look at all the images, and do the work of the editor and the art curator of picking the right images to send to the darkroom, right? So I sort of goofed on that. But now I sort of have this interesting thing where I'm actually gonna scan the maybe 2 other images that were of the scene and see if I really did pick the right one. Because of all the images I shot this week, this is definitely either my favorite or I don't know, this one was pretty good. Much easier to edit. This one basically needed no editing. I don't know. Okay. So I don't know. Maybe you learned something. Maybe I learned something. That's how I like these, right? Okay. See you next time.